starting. We can start in like 10 seconds to get the numbers. I still see the numbers going up. So
good morning, everyone. Welcome.
yeah. Numbers are still going up. So let's count until 10.
Appreciate you joining us on this beautiful day.
Yeah.
It's really tempting to be outside, but it'll be good inside too.
Maybe they listen from the park.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, let's get started. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This is our 4th week of How We Build This Toronto, and it's a webinar series featuring Toronto's most innovative leaders and the stories behind the movement they build. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nama Blonder. I'm an architect and urban planner with Smart Density. I actually run the practice with my husband, and you will see why I'm saying that. So I'm super excited about today's guest. Lirad Kligman is my partner on this webinar series, and he's the co-founder of the Yorkville team, a residential and commercial sales team in Toronto. Lirad and I started this webinar series to get a chance to ask the questions we usually just don't get to talk about or definitely be taught at school. And we thought if we find it interesting, probably others would do too. And with that, Lirad, why won't you introduce our guest today?
Yes, so thank you, Nama. So today we're privileged to be joined by Ralph and Pina from Gino and Petricone Associates Architects. They are a Toronto-based design firm led since 1995 by the both of them. They're partners in both life and in work, and they share a keen instinct for urban culture, a passion for fashioning alluring surfaces, and an evolving and inspired search for unconventional uses of forms and materials to ensure freshness, richness, and energy. So on that note, why don't you take us back to day one, where you were before you started GPA, and what led you to deciding, let's do this together?
And before you do that, if you can turn your volume a little bit down, I will speak to my mic because everyone can hear it in a kind of echo. I don't know why they heard Lirad and not me, but yeah. Okay.
Is that better? How's that?
Hopefully it will be better, but we'll know when Lirad will talk.
Okay, great.
So why won't you take it from here?
Go ahead. Well, I was we kind of overlapped at university, Pina and I. We had been dating already, I think, before Pina entered architecture school. I was in 2nd year, and I had graduated and went to work at a firm where I worked under an associate at that firm, which was Jones and Kirkland Architects, and the associate was Stephen Teeple. And then Steve opened his own firm, and I joined him basically right at the beginning and worked with him almost 6 years with Teeple Architects. And Pina?
Well, I graduated a few years behind, and I went to work. It was 1991, and it was the pit of the recession. I was just so thrilled to have gotten a job with an architect, excellent architects. I was at Baird Sampson, and not much was happening in 1991 in the architecture firm. So I decided to go to graduate school, and while I was there, I mean, I guess Ralph had already joined Teeple after Ed Jones had moved back, right, to London. And he was an associate at Teeple while I was at grad school. And really it happened, over the phone. I think Ralph had a great opportunity with Steve that is still such a close friend and mentor actually to us both. Steve taught me while I was at U of T. And it came a point where Rafa had to decide, and I was away, and over the phone, he's like, so do you want to start our own thing? And I said, absolutely. And so he turned down Steve, and as soon as I returned, we actually got married and started the firm that year.
So Pina graduated, we got married, and we started the firm within 3 months of each other. So it was a kind of interesting start to both a personal and a professional career, to say the least. So yeah, we got this wonderful little project, which, you know, for young architects, it was a restaurant on College Street. We had no idea what we were doing. We had never done any restaurants. We'd done interiors, but mainly for libraries or daycare centers or community centers. And our first project was a restaurant called Bar Italia. And it was kind of where we hung out all the time. And just so happened that our I guess, client had to move next door and asked us if we'd be interested in designing the new Bar Italia, which was a kind of seminal project for us, to say the least. It was kind of interesting to kind of work on that project, which kind of started us thinking about our role in the city, because it's actually a wonderful typology to kind of start with, an interior, a restaurant. We saw it as a collective project, a space where people come together to commune and to kind of relate to the city. So, and lo and behold, it kind of launched our career, I'm going to say, pretty well.
So, partners in life and in work, what's your secret? How do you make it work?
Stay busy. I don't really know. I don't think we have any real. We are busy. I think that's one of the things. You know, we just don't have much time to think about much else other than our busy personal lives and our busy professional lives.
Yeah.
But
the not thinking too much about it, I think helps, and not dwelling, I think also helps. Sometimes, you know, over the years, I still remember times where it was really just too exhausting to stay mad. But in fairness, I think that, you know, what probably has made us stronger in both milieus is a kind of sense of self-knowing, right? And to sort of know, you know, I have certainly weaknesses that I think are sort of balanced out by Ralph's strengths, right? And vice versa. And I think that that's something we have grown to learn and appreciate. And so it's important to sort of understand that we each need and take advantage, right, of the other in both cases. So yeah, that I think creates a true partnership. I
mean, there's no doubt that we have similar interests, similar ambitions, both about the city, about architecture. I can say that we complement each other. We approach, I'm going to say that the profession differently and the act of making architecture differently. I say Pina's the thinker, and the, you know, I'm going to say the consummate critic, and clearly, you know, in a good way. A good way. I mean, you know, I call her a professional critic because of her teaching over 25 years of being at U of T as well as a professor. So for us, you know, it's kind of interesting. I joke where, you know, if we're working on the same project across the table from each other, you know, I'm just drawing and Pina's, you know, kind of like just looking at me thinking. And it's kind of the way it is. It's really, you know, I kind of lead with the gut and Pina leads with the brain, I think. And I think it kind of, you know, makes for an interesting kind of result.
I think there's another way of putting it. It's almost like each of our instincts are sort of point of departure. In Ralph's case, it's like more is more. In my case, it's less is more. And what ends up in a project is actually either, you know, that less is more approach that actually is infused with a kind of joyous, nonsensical luxury or rogue, and vice versa, where there is a kind of more is more approach is sometimes there's a little bit of restraint to let other parts, you know, really shine and flourish and perform. So it's interesting. I think that that's sort of our natural instinct. I think it also comes, frankly, from our education. We both went to U of T, but at different times. I was in first year when Ralph was in fifth year. And it's very interesting. You know, I think we are a bit a product, like in, for example, in my time, there was a kind of rediscovery of Le Corbusier, and you know, and there was a very different kind of trend and conversation, you know, in the years that Ralph was there, even though we did overlap. So we don't like to think that that's, you know, the case, but we are very much, I think, a product of our, not just our education, but our environment, and those that are, you know, were incredibly seminal and inspiring to us. So.
And it's interesting, you know, 4 years of difference. It was at that time in architecture, you know, it was a huge difference, because I'm going to say, fortunate to be in an era at the school at U of T where there was a big transition happening. They tried to close the school when I was in fourth year because there was so much upheaval. It was kind of like I said, you know, we got a minor in architecture and a major in political science. But what was very interesting is my interest in urban design came from that, and I kind of look back on it, and it was really, you know, the height of postmodernism. And so, you know, we treated orders in third year, which would never have done, you know, maybe 2 or 3 years before that. But I got exposed to Italian rationalism, to Aldo Rossi, and to, you know, the Leon Creer, the Rob Creers, and the, you know, the Cornell School was really kind of a seminal, I think, for me anyways, when I was studying. And, you know, it kind of became dormant, my interest in kind of urban design. And I never thought about that. I always thought I'd be doing buildings and not large scale master planning. And so it was very interesting when we got offered the opportunities, it kind of all came back and really became kind of enlightened a kind of passion that was dormant for many years.
So I actually have so many questions now, but we'll take it in baby steps. So you said, okay, so you mentioned your first project. What would you consider to be your, you know, your point when you said, okay, we got this. It's becoming something that we, you know, can pay the bills with. The firm is becoming successful. What was that point?
Well, I remember when we started the firm, you know, I mentioned to Pina, I said, look, you know, you teach, and that'll be a kind of line of consistent income coming in. Not that it was a lot in those days. And then I said, well, the worst thing that could happen is that, you know, I'll have to go back and work for Steve, which is, you know, not the end of the world, go work for Steve Teeple. And it was really at the end of that year where I made as much as I made at Steve Teeple, like from a kind of just basic, you know, income survival mode. I kind of we went through the first year kind of going, well, actually we made a salary. And I have to say, we were incredibly lucky. I mean, you know, there was no plan, but we really ended up at a good spot, because we started the firm in '95, and I'm going to say that the economy in Canada was really dormant for about 4 or 5 years, and we didn't know it, that the economy was coming out of that dormant state. And by doing a project like a restaurant, that became incredibly popular. And I have to say, you know, you ride the coattails of your client, and, you know, I mean, we could take a lot of credit for it, maybe, at least for creating a backdrop, but the operations and all the effort of running a restaurant clearly made it incredibly successful. And I'd say that through that success, we got a whole string of interior projects, more restaurants, and interestingly enough, advertising agencies. And we didn't really know that advertising agencies kind of hang out at restaurants a lot. And they were attracted to us through the projects that we did. And we did, I think, about 4 or 5 interior projects. So we really started, I'm going to say, with 2 streams. One was a series of interior projects that got, I'm going to say, exposed, got published, won some awards, some international awards, when we had a lot of time to actually submit for them, and really started launching it. So we fell in love with hospitality, I have to say, and we thought that would be a vehicle to start developing a serious architectural practice. In the end, it started also defining the type of practice we were. And again, it was not by plan, it was really kind of by serendipity that, we love food and we smart enough not to own a restaurant, but enjoying the fact that we're in that field. And we've been very fortunate to be working with some of the leaders within that market, some of the best restaurateurs in Toronto. And so we
cannot underestimate that aspect of it. Was super lucky, Eugene Barone, who gave us that first, literally, it was, you're an architect, right? And, with Ralph leaving the bar at 2 a.m. And it was very important because we, and I think this just because we're architects, all architects, I think, have this quality of just kind of being sponges, observing, and there is in that a kind of alchemy in restaurants and in those, what we call them, public interiors, that is not just about design, and it's about kind of allowing that design to hold even in various scenarios and in people actually claiming that space. So putting chachkas everywhere and advertising or taping up certain specials of the day. And that's where we really became challenged, right? Given our training, given the firms we came from, we thought we would be designing institutional projects and public projects. And because that was the material we had, we actually made them, I think, into more than the design brief. And that's where really, I think, the project of the city kind of just dissipates in everything. It's infused in everything. And even Bar Italia, we had the kind of patio, and I remember conversations with the late Detlef Mertens, who lived around the corner, and we actually made a pocket of the patio. We didn't bring that facade forward, and that was apparently, not so urban, but it worked only because all the other storefronts were at the sidewalk. So I think it was really taking those lessons and moving them forward and advancing them.
I mean, there's no doubt that there is an Italianity to our approach. We clearly thought of creating a pocket, like a mini piazza in College Street, a loggia off the street, and they're all our projects. I have to say, even our restaurant work, all start with an idea about the city and an idea about kind of communal living and living in an urban experience. And so even the interiors are urban projects for us. And so how those buildings relate, how those interiors relate to the exterior. They're also places of gathering. I mean, we came from firms where, we did a lot of public work, and we thought that would be the basis for our firm. But when we opened the firm, there was no public work. It was still a recession. And, unfortunately, in our culture here, you need to be an expert and have 5 or 3 projects in the last 5 years that, in order to kind of be able to get even shortlisted for public projects. And it was a bit off-putting for us who kind of ran projects for firms. And then we had to feel like we had to go out into the desert and come back again. And so, we started working to try to get that practice going. We did some daycares, school projects, smaller projects that started growing to larger projects for school boards. But what was very interesting was, as we were doing that kind of more, I'm going to say, traditional architectural practice building, I got approached by my brother. My brother took over the family business, which is a developer builder company, and he had purchased a site, and I'm the black sheep of the family. I'm the only one that doesn't work for the company. I broke my father's heart doing that, but he had purchased a 26-acre starch plant on Lake Ontario in Mississauga. And he called me, and the question was very interesting. He goes, "Do you know much about approvals for big sites. And I had done some at Jones and Kirkland because Michael Kirkland and Edward Jones had done a lot of urban design projects. And I remembered enjoying working on those projects. And I said, yes, I think I can do it. And it was incredibly nepotistic, I have to say, that we started working on an urban design project, taking it through, and this was 1997, 98. So we kind of didn't talk about that project. We always focused on our interiors and our fledgling institutional work, because we thought that was kind of like not cool. It was developer work, and at the time, it was something that kind of didn't fit into what we thought would be our firm. Having said that, I completely thoroughly enjoyed working on it, and we originally were going to hire a bunch of architects to design the buildings, and we, I'm going to say, selfishly decided that we A, didn't trust any other architect to execute our vision, and B, it was kind of a engine to keep us going on, the lost leaders that restaurants unfortunately sometimes are. And we didn't talk about it for like 5 or 6 years, literally until the landscaping went into this 26-acre waterfront, which has squares and waterfront parks and mid-rise and high-rise. And then a company called Cadillac Fairview went to visit it and asked my brother who designed it. And he actually said, well, my younger brother designed it. And they called me and invited us to get involved in a redevelopment of a mall they owned in Don Mills. And I'd say that was the point where it really changed the trajectory of our career. When we were working on something that we're incredibly proud of as an urban design project, and even in some ways some architecture, but we never really knew how important that project that we did for my brother, that phone call that he made, would really catapult us into another type of practice. And we really called it our two solitudes for many years. That we were doing this kind of traditional architecture, young architect practice, and this kind of, odd urban design work that was for developers at larger scale. That was just starting, I'm going to say, in the early 2000s. And again, they take so long. Shops at Don Mills was almost 8 years before it was opened. So, it's a practice that requires patience. And so, we were working for, the Cadillac Fairviews, the larger clients at the same time as we were working for these great restaurateurs. And we kind of kept them separate. And then all of a sudden the world started colliding when all of a sudden, we're talking about mixed use and placemaking. And, we were doing placemaking before the word placemaking even came up. I mean, we just said, well, in Italy, there's squares, and we think that all our projects should have a square. And I think that Toronto's ready for some really great, I'm going to say, commercial squares as opposed to institutional squares. Places where people can gather, just like they can gather in a restaurant. We want them to gather in a square or on a street or on a boulevard or a promenade. So it really was a bit of kind of creating those settings that are either interior or exterior for urban living.
Yeah, I think it was 2006 when we actually, some of those urban design projects and mostly Don Mills and Port Credit actually were coming to us an early level of maturity, let's say, where maybe the impact of our design started to become evident. And in 2006, there was a moment where we were shortlisted for award for a significant interior design award at the same time as a ULI award for different projects. So there was this kind of, I think, recognition emerging, and mostly a kind of healthy robustness to our portfolio in both of these sectors. And I think that Don Mills for sure was that moment, that first moment that you started to describe. But I think also that moment happened when one of our restaurants actually won a City of Toronto Urban Design Award, and is a tiny little restaurant that was 90% interior, but it actually was recognized for its contribution to the street. So the storefront window, which we actually put all our budget into the kind of storefront window, the entry sequence, and the whole sort of organization of that sort of public interior space. So.
You're
I mean, one
basically
of the other things, is our work is a bit messy, I'm going to say, and it's maybe intentionally that way. I think,
or that's our story.
and that's our story, and we're sticking to it. But we studied, both Pina and I had an incredible opportunity to study under Bruce Kuwabara, who is the consummate, I'm going to say an architect's architect, and really was seminal in the idea of pluralism. And that Toronto, for me, is a plural city. It's a messy city, and it's a city that you really can't define. It's not beautiful by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's the collision of cultures and kind of layers of intensification that makes it incredibly exciting. And so for me, our master plans, our interiors are layered, and they're kind of not so, I'm going to say, single-minded in terms of the kind of architectural ideas, that we want them to be read at many different levels, and we want people to be really happy and enjoy those spaces. So even our master plans are trying to not be master plans. They're trying to be something that in some ways has an accretive personality about them, that could actually feel like it might be something that has built over time in a more picturesque way, or can accept the fact that there could be a number of people working on that project and could actually create a successful result.
Okay, I want to say something to the audience. I have 15 questions that we did not plan for. So if you in the audience want to ask any questions, type it in our text box, and I will try to curate a little bit. So your basic, you know what, I'll open it up. What is it like doing business development for architects? And if you have, let's say, 100% of the time, how do you split it up between, business development, operation, execution, ensuring quality of design, running the practice, being married and running a family? How is it like?
Yeah, so I mean, one thing that we, it's almost 25 years, actually. This coming month will be 25 years. I do think that we haven't, in fairness, had early on when we started to talk about how we expected to be doing these public institutional projects. I really cannot count how many RFPs I wrote for some of these public projects, until one morning I woke up and I'm like, I think we should be rethinking, this approach that we just again, like, being a product of the firms that we came from, this is how we understood we could, get these public projects. But when we had to really look at the success rate, the success percentage, it was dismal and probably not worth the time, that we were spending on them. So we changed our strategy, and I think that we started to actually, the work that started to somehow speak for itself. And so far as we were lucky that the hospitality projects, anybody could walk in and see it and experience it. And then some of our development projects were starting to come to fruition and being built at the same time. So we have really, it's hard to, I wish that we had a better story or a better lesson, but really it has been through word of mouth. And we have, I would say, especially in the recent 10 years, have been responding to opportunities. And so we don't have business development insofar as we don't actually put in our open RFPs. We always put in for invited RFPs. And I think that this is part of our dilemma, is that, I say to Ralph that he's sort of not allowed to go out. And this is sort of, in this time of working from home, it's been very interesting, because every time Ralph would go out, he'd come back and, with another project, and I'd be like, stop, and so there is this idea that maybe we would love to actually start to direct, our desk, sort of put the hand on the wheel of the bus, because instead of just responding, and we've just been incredibly lucky that these opportunities are amazing that come our way, it would be very nice, and I think smart, after 25 years, that we start to actually control and actually target some projects that we would like to get and like to have.
At the beginning, I use the analogy that at the beginning, out of necessity, we unfurled a sail and let the wind take us wherever. And we really kind of, again, out of necessity, anything that came in the door, we kind of jumped on it. And again, I'm going to say we were very lucky to be getting projects from people that really kind of knew what they were doing, restaurateurs that were at the top of their game, that really helped, I'm going to say, both be a collaborator within the projects and can trust that the projects would go ahead. We hated working with people that, just the responsibility of spending people's money to open a restaurant and close within a year, just didn't sit well with us. So, but I'd say for the first half of our practice, it was kind of that kind of ethos of whatever comes in. There was always a kind of idea of trying to keep the work plural, to try to keep our kind of feet in a bunch of different typologies in case, again, coming through out of the recession, in case something went sideways, we'd have other kind of legs, let's say, of a table to kind of support us. I'd say the last 10 years, like many of our peers, Toronto has been an unbelievable energy of growth. And so we've been kind of spoiled, I'm going to say, by the amount of work out in the field, as well as the interest in our practice. So, again, I think that might be testament to the quality that we were committing. And again, I want to say that there's a reason we're called associates, because we desperately want to create a place where people can feel that their efforts are recognized. And so we have a firm based on studios run by associates that in themselves kind of almost run like independent little practices. So people can really feel like they're kind of part of a kind of bigger picture. And their delivery at the highest level and commitment to the projects, I think, goes through and to the client and is recognized by the client. So we've been very fortunate to have a stable of clients that have constantly come back and become really kind of foundational in terms of our private sector work at the very least.
Mm-hmm. It's like we've grown with them in some cases, that as their enterprises sort of evolve into other things, and we kind of go along with them. And I think that we're incredibly proud of the repeat clients, I guess, that we have. And it's been a bit of a roller coaster. And we find ourselves complaining that we're too busy. And, when people say, well, that's a really good problem to have, and we say yes, but it's still a problem. And I'm sure any architects listening out there can understand that. So, I think that in Nama's question, more than just business development. So in some ways, we did not have to invest in business development. We did not have to really direct a lot of that energy to it. That doesn't mean it's necessarily a good thing. It's a good thing because we are busy and growing and thriving and have great opportunities. But it really is important, I think, now at this stage for us to gain more control. And at the same time, in terms of our life, work division, we have 3 boys, as you might know. John Lorenzo, who's 22, Massimo, who is 18, and Luca, who is 15. And we don't really know what we did, but both John Lorenzo and Massimo are studying architecture.
It's all Pina's fault.
It's not my fault.
Completely Pina's fault.
And I think that, we speak to other colleagues and we're like, what did you do? How did you? And anyway, it was a big surprise that they are interested in architecture, because, life since they were born was really coming with us to sites, like weekends at work, and they're incredible at, you know, going with the flow, but not necessarily loving, you know, that part of their home life. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah, they're both working on construction this summer, both Massimo and John Lorenzo. And I think that we're happy that they're seeing that other side. They might be, you know, hopefully inspired by that other side. We'll see.
It's great to see that next generation coming up. That's really exciting.
Yes.
I want to chat a little bit. So what I find really special about your firm is the number of women in leadership positions. I'd love to hear about your thoughts. Like, was that a purposeful strategy from day one? And your thoughts on having a diverse sort of leadership, women in leadership positions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we if we had to be completely honest, we did not set out, you know, 25 years ago to say that we were going to have a firm of, you know, at least 50% women. But what started to happen was that I think that in the back of our minds, it was very important, definitely important to me, and of course to Ralph, who I think recognizes also that that the gender balance is just one other form of diversity in the practice, and how that really makes for better work, frankly, in that there are people that maybe are not all trained, you know, at U of T or Waterloo or McGill, that they are trained in other parts of the world or in other ways, and that we see as just enriching the group of people that we have at GPA. So what happened was we kind of looked up one day and said, hey, we're, you know, 50% women, we really like this. And at that point, we made it a mandate. So we already found ourselves, I would say, in that situation. And then we kind of knew what we had and really worked to maintain that. A few years ago when BEAT started, Building Equity in Architecture Toronto, I was invited to speak with some other women in practice, because we still, even today, have sometimes more than 50% students in the Master of Architecture at U of T and in other schools of architecture, but the number of women as principals and as registered architects is staggeringly low compared to men. And BEAT ran this series to sort of ask this question and to understand this phenomena. And I did find myself among colleagues really proud and being able to say not only the number of women that we had in the office in general, but the number of women that were in leadership positions. And I think that that's really where the influence, you know, comes and happens.
I mean, so much has changed in 25 years. I have to say, it's as an industry, I'm going to say, where I remember in first year architecture, I think, you know, it was a very strange time, but I think half the women failed the first year. I think it might have been intentional, unfortunately, in that case, but it was just interesting to kind of be a male going, what happened to half the class, right? And, you know, or a quarter of the class at least. And so it was, you know, and then, you know, my partner in life and in crime, I'm going to say, you know, we clearly opened the firm and there was equality there. So it kind of, I'm going to say, developed on its own. And then at a certain point, it became a really important component of our practice. I'd say that, you know, just looking back, I think the industry has changed leaps and bounds. It has a long way to go. There's no doubt about it. But even on the client side, specifically in the development field, you're starting to see women where starting to get leadership positions, starting to become fulsome parts of the client side as well. So I think it just makes for better work, better experiences, and we really kind of enjoy that. And again, supporting the practice with that is incredibly important for us.
Mm-hmm.
As challenging as it is, right? It's not easy. It's not easy still, and you know, we got a long way to go.
Yeah, I mean, we think it's not easy because there is a certain age where there is more pressure, frankly, on women to actually be that primary caregiver. And so we have worked over the years of trying to imagine part-time kinds of scenarios and ways that there could be adjustments made to accommodate that home life. The home work balance, because I went through it, we realized that it is a window of time, and so there is long-term investment, I would say, and maybe long-term vision of our staff complement that, maybe someone takes a hiatus and has to leave for a couple of years, but then we always imagine that they might be back and that they might be in a different, scenario when they do come back. So, yeah.
That's great to hear. Yeah, thanks for leading the charge in the industry towards diversity and women in leadership positions. I think it's admirable. So we're just coming to the last couple of minutes we've got here. And as a final question, is what sort of wisdom or key learnings that you'd like to pass on to the next generation of architects that are aspiring to start up their own firms and leave a mark on the industry?
Well, we still think ourselves as a young firm, and I'm still in a bit of denial over 25 years have gone by. It's gone by so quickly. I'd say I'm very excited, I'm going to say, for the next generation. I'm very happy to see a number of firms, I'm going to say, just behind us or a few steps behind us that are just nascent firms that are starting up. And I'm very excited for them. I think that there's, I'm very bullish on Toronto, and I'm very bullish on Canada. I'm very defensive about architecture in Canada. I kind of get upset when, for some reason, Toronto has attracted an international set of architects coming in and swooping in, and it bothers me to no end, because I think that Toronto still has a long way to go. It still has a bit of an inferiority complex. I call Toronto a bit of a teenage city. It used to be a very kind of adolescent city before when we started our practice. And you fight for design and you lose a lot of battles. I'd say that design is much more at the kind of leading part of the discussion as opposed to the kind of end of the discussion of building in Toronto. So I'm really excited about that. I think that really need to kind of support those young firms and give them opportunities, because I think that we need to start thinking about us exporting our skills and developing our skills from within. I keep saying, not too many people are not Danes working in Denmark. They created an amazing culture of design, and now they're exporting that culture. And I think that it's a shame that we can't do that here in Toronto, where I'd say there's so many architects that know housing better than other architects internationally, because we've been working in the housing world for so long, but for some reason we are not given the opportunity to create really interesting results. There's still this kind of, I'm going to say, inferiority complex within Toronto. And I think that's really something that I'd like to see changed. It's starting, and I see that with a number of young firms in Toronto. I also think the public projects have to be much more open to not just experience, but ideas. And I think that that's another battle that maybe I don't have the effort and energy to take on. But I think that also has to be something that we can break down. But I'd say that we've taken advantage of a burgeoning market in Toronto to create a collection of wonderful, talented firms. And I think it just, keep working at it, and hopefully, understand that what you do, what gets built, you get judged by that. So to kind of be tenacious about delivering something that you're proud of, because that ultimately is really how you build a practice.
I would add to that, we do often say that we're only as good as what gets built. but there is also work that doesn't get built, that gets disseminated, and that's also something that you should be proud to put your name on when that work does get disseminated. But I would also say that it's true that design has a completely different status today than it did when we started our firm, generally even in popular culture. But I guess if I would have to give any advice, it's something that Ralph actually taught me over the years, and that is you really don't know where opportunity will come from, meaning that you need to take responsibility for making a project into what it could be, not just to what it presents, and not to be so quick about writing off a client that might come across as not appreciating design or not wanting to do something interesting, but rather to sort of listen in a way for the opportunity. Because I can, remember a number of times where I would say to Ralph, like, why don't worry, like, we don't need, why should we bother, right? Like they don't get it, or, maybe, we want it to be something amazing and they don't really. But the tenacity of saying, of at least trying, like sometimes it doesn't happen, but I can say that more often than not, that conviction and that passion is contagious to clients, and that it requires patience. But I think some of our biggest sort of most significant watershed moments really came from projects that at the beginning we were kind of scratching our heads saying, is this going to be, do they want to do something interesting? Are they going to come along with us? So that's maybe part of the messy part, rather than sort of imagining, sort of best laid plans. And I think business plan is always really good to have, but to really understand that you could deviate significantly and to stay nimble, to sort of allow that to happen. Yeah.
Lirad, I think we need to invite them again, because I have so many questions, and obviously this was not enough time to discuss everything. And if I found this, I don't know if you touched on certain soft points for me, but I found it incredibly valuable. So I personally want to thank you, and also on behalf of all the dozens of guests we had. So with that, thank you. Unfortunately, trust me, we need to end it to finish. But thank you very, very much, Ralph and Pina. I really
thank you. It was a real pleasure.
And as a little teaser, we next week we have Edward Skira from Urban Toronto, and that is a fabulous story. Great. Because that was a hobby that turned into a very successful business. We have Eve Louise from Urban Nation, Market Vision, and Woodcliff Development, and we have Andrea Del Zotto later in July with Tridel and ADZ Ventures. So I hope that was a good teaser for you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a fabulous day. Enjoy the weather. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Great.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.